Hello watch enthusiasts. Now, a great deal of watch collectors have started to look to alternative case materials, notably composites. Now in the composite category I include the carbon and the forged carbon cases and carbon fibre cases, for example, as well as ceramic cases. And of course these cases offer different capabilities to steel cases or titanium or any sort of metal, in that, for example, forged carbon is often much more shock resistant than steel, for example, and more tensile, has more tensile strength, while ceramic will have a much greater surface strength and therefore will be far less prone to scratches. So of course these offer very interesting capabilities and characteristics, and this is why I'd like to talk about some of the top models in this category of watches at different price points, to really show you what is available, as various people have emailed me with questions surrounding this topic. Now the first watch which I'd like to talk about, which was in fact released at Baselworld this year, is the Victorinox Inox Carbon, or Ino if you're French, which of course in French stands for, effectively means stainless steel, which is ironic really when this watch comes in a carbon composite case. And the purpose of this watch is really to have a watch which is extremely resilient to the elements, so it's the ultimate field watch, if you will. Now the watch comes in this large 43mm case, which does make the watch a little bit too big for some people, but then for the purpose this watch is aiming to provide, I feel the size of the case is justified. So it has an extremely resilient style of construction, with a very thick bezel to protect the crystal from any knocks or scratches, and of course has a sapphire crystal on the front of the watch. There's also very good legibility from that very heavily loomed matte black dial, again with loomed hands, and military time printed on the inside of the crystal, which gives a very particular look and isn't seen very much on watches, at this price point at least, where details are in fact printed onto the crystal itself, rather than being printed downwards onto the dial. The watch is powered by a Ronda Swiss quartz movement, which won't appeal to all people, but the reason for this movement being in this watch is for the sake of superior shock resistance, because of course a mechanical movement simply won't be able to take the abuse that a quartz movement will be able to endure. Now in terms of the movement and crystal and face generally, the detail here is very good. I had a good look at this watch at Baselworld, and there's very good detailing on the dial with applied indices, which are designed to remain in place under even the most vigorous of shocks. Additionally, the movement does have an end-of-life indicator, so the second hand will beat in an odd pattern in order to show that the battery requires changing. And of course, the crystal is triple anti-reflective coated, to give it a really very legible look in even the most intense of lights. Of course, the case of this watch is really the main article, and frankly, it offers quite a lot of technological capabilities, really, for the price of either £715 or £795, depending on the strap option. But in this case, we have a very thick 43mm case, which I've mentioned, which is made from this carbon composite, which is very shock resistant, but also, unlike a lot of carbon composites, is very scratch resistant, which is something it shares with carbon ceramic style cases, which certainly do have a really superior level of scratch resistance. But here we see a very nice halfway house, if you will, between the two. Also, the crown's extremely well protected, with only the top of the crown exposed for easier grip when unscrewing the crown to adjust the time. Additionally, that bezel is that traditional inox style of bezel, which offers protection to the front of the watch in the case of bumps or knocks. The watch comes on two strap options, either simply a rubber strap for £715, or for £795 you get the rubber strap and a paracord style strap, which is a woven style of strap, which is rarely seen, but it can be unravelled and used for survival purposes. And I've heard that if you give Victorinox a good enough story about how you used it in a survival situation, they will replace it for free. Another very interesting model in the sub £1,000 price point is the Tempest forged carbon models. And Tempest is a brand which is still a very small brand and has become rather beloved of a great deal of people who enjoy alternative styles of cases. So in this case, forged carbon, which is effectively a manner of producing a case whereby chips of carbon are held together with a resin, which forms a sort of a lattice, which is it is strong in all directions, unlike carbon fibre, which is strong in certain directions, depending on how the threads are orientated. So in this case, you get a very, very resilient case, which in this design is very, very ergonomic. Now, the dimensions of the watch are quite deceptive, because it's a 43mm watch, but due to its very short lug-to-lug distance of 47.5mm, it's a very, very wearable size for really anyone's wrist, due to this curved case shape, which is somewhere between a barrel or tonneau and a cushion-style case, but is curved to conform to the wrist, which I think is a very clever design, and certainly has been very well considered. Now, the dial is a matte black dial with a very clear chapter ring, which surrounds the indices, which are BGW9 lume, which creates this very crisp, modern blue glow. And of course, the watch is very, very legible with its different colours of hands, with the orange for the second hand and the minute hand, and then white for the hour hand. We also see very, very clear and large and very well designed lume plots around the dial, with a double lume plot at 12 o'clock to allow the watch to be orientated in the dark very quickly and easily. Now, the watch is tested to be very shock resistant and very water resistant for a field watch like this to 200 metres. And each watch is individually tested for these criteria, like a professional diver's watch would be, to ensure that every watch which comes off the production line is up to standard, which I think is a very good aspect to this watch, when a great deal of watches aren't tested individually. They're sort of batch tested to create a sort of a slightly less rigorous and less expensive testing routine, whereas here we have a very clear test of each watch to ensure that every watch is up to par. Now, the case is relatively thick at 14.7mm thick, but I think is very carefully designed to fit the wrist, and a great deal of that height is added by that protective bezel, which slips under the cuff easily due to its curved shape. Beating inside the watch, we have a Miyota 9015, but again, it's been made shock resistant specifically for this purpose. But I must say, I think this is no bad thing in terms of having a Miyota movement, because they offer very, very similar capabilities to ETAs, and if anything, have a smoother hand winding, which I think there's something to be said for. But also are much less expensive to have serviced than the equivalent ETA 2824, which I think in a watch like this, which is a sports watch, at its core with its heavily loomed dial and strong case, really is important in terms of durability and serviceability. Now, this next watch, the Rado Diamaster Grande Seconde, is a watch which does take a jump in price from the Tempest. And the reason for this is because Rado are a brand which produce a great deal of alternative material cases, from everything from titanium to tungsten carbide through to ceramic in this case. But I felt that really to give the best deal in terms of what they offer, the most interesting movement should be chosen. And personally, I'm not keen on a lot of the black case Rados with integrated bracelets, because I feel they look a bit dated in their aesthetic, though of course that is a matter of opinion. Whereas I feel this Diamaster, which is a relatively new model, is really everything I'd expect from a ceramic dress watch. And ceramic dress watches are remarkably rare due to the fact that ceramic is usually seen as a sports product. But in this case, Rado have actually made a grey ceramic case rather than a black one for this watch, which I think works extremely well with that interesting dial layout. Now, from the pictures, you will see this watch comes in a great many different dial variations, from blues to blacks, to various styles of finishing on each of these dials, from very fine brushing through to a thicker sort of pattern and grid style patterns, which I think are all very, very attractive and really are the choice of the buyer of the watch. But the dimensions of the watch are quite large at 43mm. In diameter. That said, the watch is only 11.5mm thick, making it a very slim watch for a watch with such a substantial movement. And the movement in this watch is an ETA 2899, and this is a very, very rarely seen movement due to this particular layout. And it does in fact mean that the movement, if you look at it through the exhibition case back, is actually displaced to the one side of the case rather than in the centre, to show that particular layout of the second hand and the central dial placed to the right hand side of the watch nearer the crown. There is also a date at the 9 o'clock position on that sub-second dial, which is placed over the top of the other dial, which is an acquired taste, I think, but an interesting one if it's one that you like. And this watch is also water resistant to 100 metres, which I think seems somewhat irrelevant for a dress watch, but it's still nice to know if you're going to use this watch on a very regular basis. Now, the case of the watch is, of course, this grey ceramic in this fully polished finish, which I think gives a very different aesthetic to this watch from other dress watches out there with steel cases, for instance. The detailing on this watch is also excellent, as ever from Rado, with the very careful design and finishing of the dial, and also in addition to the decoration on the movement, with perlage, Côte de Genève, and the other finishes that are available on these sorts of movements, as well as a custom anchor-shaped rotor from the brand, which matches, I think, the moving logo at 12 o'clock on the dial extremely well, which is an anchor which actually rotates on a pivot, which I think is a very elegant way of showing it, and certainly does make this watch an extremely interesting package for £2,250, which, considering the complication of this watch and also the rarity of a grey ceramic case at this price point, makes it very good value. Now, the next watch in this list is a chronograph, but before I talk about this, I was planning to include the Tudor Fast Rider chronograph in ceramic on this in this video, but actually I decided to not include this watch in favour of the Omega Speedmaster Dark Side of the Moon, simply because the Tudor comes in at 2/3 the price of the Omega, but offers a mildly modified ETA movement, and in my opinion doesn't have the same quality of finish as the Omega, and therefore I would definitely recommend spending between £2,000 and £3,000 more than the Tudor on, for example, a display model of the Omega, because the scratch resistance of ceramic is so high, really, that one has very, very little to worry about when buying a display model. And therefore I think actually the increased value of the Omega is a worthy investment. Of course, the Speedmaster Dark Side of the Moon has become something of an iconic ceramic watch, because it was very much one of the first watches to pioneer the ceramic case. And it still offers wonderful technology and wonderful features several years on, as it has the very, very beautifully decorated coaxial chronometer movements from Omega, and now, in fact, they are beginning to introduce their master chronometer line of anti-magnetic movements into these watches too, thus increasing the quality and the value for money for the £8,000 list price of this watch. Now, of course, I say £8,000 list price, but in truth one can get hold of one of these watches for around the £6,000 mark, if, as I said previously, one buys either a display model or one buys one of the last ones in the shop, because often they try to discount them to acquire newer models. So it's certainly worth looking into with this watch, because it is an incredible watch for the money. Now, in terms of the case, and in this case the dial, these are both made out of zirconium dioxide, or zirconia, which is a very, very scratch-resistant, if somewhat brittle, ceramic material. But the fact it has such a high surface hardness means that it can be finished extremely carefully, with both brushed and polished finishes, to give a very varied aesthetic to this watch. Also, this is one of the rare examples of watches on the market, especially at this price point, with every part of the case being made of ceramic, from the deployant on the bracelet or strap, through to the pushers, the crown, and the bezel, and even the dial in this case, including the case back, which really does make a watch which is an entirely ceramic piece, where a lot of people would appreciate a watch which is like this, whereas a lot of brands offer a ceramic case but then offer all the other details, notably the crowns, the pushers, the case back, in steel to save costs. Of course, the dimensions of the watch are relatively large at 44.25mm. That said, though, this is a watch which wears quite small for that size because of a shorter lug-to-lug distance than equivalent watches, and also due to those twisted lugs actually reducing the size of the case substantially horizontally compared to other 44.25mm timepieces, making this watch actually a very wearable piece and not that much more difficult to wear than the 42mm Professional. Of course, the dial is wonderfully detailed, as one would expect with a Speedmaster from Omega, with a very carefully designed dial with that shiny finish and glossy finish that one would see on normal zirconium dioxide ceramic, along with applied indices and a very contrasting look. Though a fully black version is available, I personally prefer the version with a more legible aesthetic, because I think it makes the watch very much true to its original purpose of being a sports timepiece. Now, the really most impressive part of this watch is the movement, and it really is a wonderful movement with a coaxial escapement, which means that one has a greatly reduced friction on the escapement of the watch, making service intervals longer, and general wear and timekeeping through the time of the life of the watch altogether better. Also, it does have the regulation that one would expect from Omega, as well as being very well displayed by a full-size exhibition caseback showing the full movement in all its glory, really, on the back of the watch. Now, the final watch in this video is one which I think is very rarely associated with good value, and this is the Blancpain bathyscaphe. And this is specifically the version in ceramic, and this comes in both a 43mm and now a 36mm version. The 43mm one is the one which I'd like to talk about today, though, because due to the fact that it competes quite directly with watches such as the Rolex Submariner, it's often discounted in shops and sold at a very, very large discount. Now, I'm afraid I can't give any specific shops which do offer the discount because it changes between shops very regularly, but one can often find this watch for around £7,500, and £7,500, which is compared to the retail price of £9,900, which is an enormous discount on a watch like this, and in my opinion, having seen this watch on several occasions and handled one several times, really does offer some of the best finishing on any ceramic case I think I've ever seen, especially at this price point. Of course, the dial is this gorgeous sunburst black or blue, depending on the model. Personally, my favourite is the blue with the grey, plasma grey case, which I think looks utterly brilliant in this format of a vintage, yet remarkably contemporary style of dive watch. The watch does, of course, feature the in-house Blancpain movement, which is in fact anti-magnetic and automatic, and can be seen through the exhibition caseback, which is, I think, a very attractive feature, especially on a 300-metre diver like this. And I think this watch offers a refinement that one doesn't see on certain other watches in this price point, considering the fact that it offers a very simple aesthetic, despite being quite large as far as watches go, at 43mm. I think it's a very interesting design because it does hark back to those older days of dive watches, while having that very modern and crisp touch of having the ceramic. Now, I do find it rather appealing, the fact the watch has the no-date aesthetic, but does in fact still have the date placed at 4:30, so it doesn't interfere with the placement of the indices on the watch, but is still present for the times when it is necessary. Of course, the attention to detail on a watch of this type is still fantastic, with details such as the fact the indices and the hands are white gold, to avoid any tarnishing over time. And these are little details which I think Blancpain do extremely well to produce an interesting watch in this ceramic guise, while producing a watch which, in this case, isn't unreasonably priced compared to other options on the market. Anyway, I'll conclude this video here, but thank you very much for watching, and do please like, share and subscribe if you did enjoy the video and would like to see more content in future, and enjoy more videos. So do also please leave your comments down below as to what you think of ceramic and composite watches as a whole, in terms of your opinions, because I do find it rather interesting to ask the market their thoughts. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm on the Watch Guy, over and out.